Hello everybody and welcome to Adobe Live. We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we are streaming and creating from today and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. My name is Flynn Tracy and I'm here with Jeremy Lord. How are you doing, Jeremy?
Hey man, how's it going?
I'm good. We had a great stream yesterday, so we're jumping into pixel art, which we are going to finish off today. Which was tons and tons of fun. We had some great questions. So if you're watching live, first time here or something like that, please don't hesitate to ask questions as we're going along and we will do our best to answer it. You can ask questions on YouTube or Behance. And if you missed anything in the previous stream, that's all right. I think Jeremy can bring you up to speed of we'll do a quick little recap so that if you did miss out on anything, you won't feel like you missed out at all. So
I can do that. Yeah.
All right. That sounds good. All right, so switching over to your screen now. We've got this cute little like Japanese-inspired pixel art isometric dwelling. It's a mouthful,
like
but
sushi restaurant kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
So we've gone for like a range of different things here. Isometric because we've kind of never really done that, or at least you and I have never really kind of covered it too much in a stream.
Yeah.
Pixel art because pixel art is super fun. It's a completely different way of working for me. And I think something that's actually quite approachable, even though it does, we spoke about this yesterday, it does kind of present some challenges and some difficulties that kind of like quote unquote normal art doesn't have. But I do think it makes it a little bit more accessible if your main kind of hold up on doing drawings is a sense of like, I don't know how to draw very well.
Right.
Then I think pixel art can definitely help to kind of overcome some of those obstacles. Like it's not like a magic wand of just like, cool, now you know how to make amazing art. But there's definitely something there that kind of makes it a little bit more accessible, I think. Is the word I'm looking for. But
nice.
And then isometric and pixel art just like fit together because isometric is SimCity, is all those kind of like top-down games, and pixel art is video games. So yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So we spoke a little bit last week. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's all good. I was just going to ask you what the inspiration from this, where the inspiration for this came from.
Yeah, so just kind of like I really enjoy kind of working with Japanese themes, kind of cute anime, manga, all that kind of stuff. And I love sushi and I have a cat. So it just kind of played into all these kind of different things of like, how can I do all of that into one, and kind of isometric sushi shop just kind of presents itself as something that could be quite fun to do.
Yeah.
And also gives opportunities to kind of work in pixel art in a way that like plays to the strengths of pixel art rather than kind of getting around, trying to get around some of the weaknesses of pixel art.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's basically it. We kind of did a quick little look at Firefly as well yesterday, the new Adobe AI beta program, and just kind of got little bits of inspiration from there in terms of color, in terms of kind of ideas. But the rest of this is mostly just like going online and trying to figure out, like what does a Japanese vending machine look like? What are some of the things that we can add in there to make sure it looks kind of like the right feeling and has that Japanese feel to it. Yeah.
Cool.
So yesterday we obviously didn't get this far into it. We had, we just kind of looked at basic colors, which I've undone some of. We had basic line work, which I've added a fair bit to, just in terms of detailing. All these things are just like time doing the thing. There's nothing kind of like new processes that we didn't cover yesterday for this. Just advancing the drawing a little bit more. But we're not finished, so we need to still kind of do a few little bits and pieces. So let's jump in and kind of straight away do that. So if you missed it yesterday, I keep wanting to say last week because usually we do different kind of streams that way, but
yeah.
I've started from this sketch that has a hell of a lot of detail, which we probably won't be able to get it all into this because the nature of pixel art obviously is limiting in the detail that you can put in, which is important because it means that it looks like pixel art, right? Like if you try and go too detailed, then it doesn't really kind of play that game anymore. So we're just going to start adding some of the things in and seeing how we go. So I've got basic colors that I'm pretty happy with. Colors, one of the things that I get a lot of questions about of like, how do you choose your colors? The long answer to that is like, oh, it's, it's a laborious process and I have color palettes that I use like regularly and all that kind of stuff, which is true. But also I think the short answer, and probably the more correct and real answer, is I kind of just experiment a fair bit with stuff. So I will go in at this stage, once I've kind of started, picking colors and getting something that I feel works well for a nighttime scene. So like this kind of like purpley color for buildings is maybe not what you would expect first up to kind of have as a building color. But because I'm going for kind of like a nighttime vibe, that fits well, right? We've got a bit of like a bluish tone. But I do often also go in and start messing around at this stage with like, what else could this be? Like, what are some of the other colors that I didn't really think about that could be quite interesting? And that's literally just done as you saw, by just going to the top of my layer stack and putting a hue and saturation adjustment layer, and then messing around with that and kind of seeing like, the getting some pretty wacky results. But it's good to kind of, I guess, expand your color horizon of like, I would have never thought to put this green with this blue, and it kind of works a little bit. Maybe I just need to tweak, like obviously the windows can't stay blue like that, but maybe there's something there that I can mess around with. Another thing that I do as well as an adjustment layer is play around with gradient maps. So gradient maps essentially work in the same way. If you can imagine like black and white, right? So if I swap to black and white, and I'm going to need to reverse that, it just takes my image and literally just kind of looks at the values on a grayscale and assigns those colors. So my darker colors will lean towards the more kind of black look. So you can see here, if I turn that off, one of the darkest colors in here is this kind of like old classic Japanese roof tiles and these little flags at the front of the restaurant. So they're going to be the ones that are closest to black. Right. And then on the lighter end of the scale, closer to like whites on the grayscale, are these windows. So they're going to be the closest thing to the white on the grayscale, and everything else kind of sits in the middle. But you can do this with a bunch of different colors. So Photoshop comes with a bunch of presets that you can mess around with and kind of play around with. And these kind of like quite fun, right? We've got a slightly more pastel, a little bit more monochromatic as well, a little bit more kind of all in the same range of tones, maybe a little bit less contrast, but still could be fun to mess around with and see what happens. But you can also create your own. And I have a fun time kind of creating a lot of my own gradient maps here to kind of play around with and see how they kind of look. So this would just be me like experimenting and messing around and just kind of almost like stabbing in the dark and seeing like, hey, that could be interesting. That's something that I didn't think about. Maybe then I can go back to the drawing board and like fix some of the like colors that aren't working. But that would be something that I'd probably do a little bit later on in the process. But just to kind of address this thing of like, how are you choosing your colors? I kind of only half choose my colors, and then I like see how they go once I start editing them and what I like. So it's not like in my head from the word go on something like this.
So you kind of start with like a pretty good idea. I mean, you know that there's going to be like it's nighttime, so that helps inform your decisions. But as you're going through, you're not like laboriously changing the slider at the beginning of the process. That all kind of comes much later. Yeah,
and different elements like this vending machine here that I've got on a separate layer. We spoke about this yesterday as well. The vending machine on a separate layer is kind of fun because it just means that we can start to like place this in different ways. Oop, and I didn't color behind it.
You're like a painter that like painting a rental that's just painted over the like previous occupant's cupboard.
So we could move this, anywhere we want and just kind of see how that kind of sits. And again, we can also like flip this horizontally put it on the other side if we want. Not that it would go in front of the door because that's not very useful. But so putting things on different layers and then seeing like, there's a fair bit of red here. What if the vending machine was a different color? Maybe like, what if it was like a bright blue or something like that? Does that add to the overall contrast of my image? Or does it make it a little bit more detrimental? Does it not kind of match up with what I'm trying to do? So there's definitely some trial and error that would go in at this stage. So let's get back into this a little bit and kind of get back to our outline. And we spoke a little bit yesterday as well about the isometric angles being 60-30. So the 45-degree angle where you're kind of doing 1-to-1, right? So you go one up, one across, one up, one across, one up, one across. That's just a 1-to-1 ratio. So you're going to get this 45-degree angle. But we want 60 and 30-degree to make up the angles that we're looking at, right? So we're actually going to go 60 and 30 is a 2-to-1. So we're going to go 2 across, 1 up, 2 across, 1 up, 2 across, 1 up. And that's going to give us the exact angle that we're looking for. So I'm going to replicate that again for my little aircon unit that's going to sit on the side here. So I've just turned off my colors and my background so I can actually see my sketch. Not that I can see it super well if I'm zoomed in that much, but mostly just for scale, right? So 2, 2, 2, 2, and then probably 2 as well. And then again, we did this yesterday, but instead of kind of having to replicate that, I can take this and kind of copy it down to here. And that just means I work a little bit faster and I'm able to operate in a little bit more of a clean way.
Yeah. It's clean because you know that it's right when you copy it as well. Like once you've created something, you're like, well, I know it's going to be perfect. So it removes any kind of human error or like inconsistencies that could pop up. Plus it saves you some clicks.
Yep. It does.
I have a question from chat. Sorry, I'm talking all over you today. The question was, in what field is pixel art used? So do you want to chat a little bit about that?
Yeah, so traditionally pixel art it's kind of funny, right? Because it's something that we do as a style. I'm just going to continue working on this as I'm talking, but it's a thing that's become a style that looks a certain way because we want it to. But it's actually a necessity of like computers back in the days that were just not able to cope with the graphics that you would get potentially in video games these days. And so in order to kind of make up for that, they would kind of crunch down and have, very, very lo-fi, low res kind of work to kind of graphics to put in it. And that's where you get this kind of pixel art style, which has become completely become a style, but originally that's just how we made art back in those days. It wasn't intended to look that way. It's just the limitations of the tech said it has to look this way, which is kind of cool. I think kind of interesting to think about is like now it's become a style, but back in the days it was actually just like this is how you made art. The only way you could do it. Yeah. And so that's where it comes from. It has this like retro video game vibe specifically because it comes from retro video games. That's basically it. Not much more to kind of say about that. Yeah, cool. And it's like the way that we're doing it here, like it's not being built to be like used in a game or anything necessarily. It's more like an artistic piece. So something that you would post like using Photoshop to make a like interpretation of what pixel art might look like. That's right. Yeah. That's absolutely right. And it's become a style that like clients will call you up and commission you to do. Like, we need something that looks like it's a retro video game kind of style. So can you do it in pixel art? Like, it's become synonymous with the thing that it came from. And so now we're kind of like, I'm kind of hacking Photoshop back to its limitations, even though it can obviously produce like way better quality images than pixel art, I'm having to kind of hack it back. And if you watch yesterday's stream, you saw kind of like me messing around with a bunch of different settings to take away from Photoshop making this image quality better, because I want it to be kind of a little bit crap so that it looks like, you know, lo-fi pixel art. So that's basically where it kind of comes from. Now you saw me kind of take that aircon unit and put it on a separate layer, mostly because, again, I can then move it around. And the beauty of all this is that, you know, wherever I put it, it will fit. It will be in perspective, it will fit, and it will work as intended, which is kind of fun to do. But so that's why I put this on a separate layer, but I probably don't really need to, which is one of the other really cool things with pixel art. Is if you look at my colors here, I've got a bunch of different layers that I haven't named because I'm not a good boy.
You lose one space point.
Normally, you know, I'd have a bunch of layers like this just because it's easier to work with, and just means that I can kind of work to stuff a little bit more comfortably. But with pixel art, you know, I can select any of these colors that I need very, very quickly and very easily because it's all completely just pixels. So there's not going to be any kind of like halfway points and an anti-aliasing or anything that happens like that. I can very easily isolate different colors on this board to work to. So I probably actually don't even really need to do any layers for that reason when I'm working with pixel art. But just so that I don't have to make a selection and then I can just make quick adjustments without having to change the whole thing, layers are still quite handy for that kind of stuff. So,
yeah.
You know. So again, same thing, like, you know, having this aircon unit on its own layer just means I won't have to mess around with it too much or mess around with my layers in order to move it around, because it's all in its own kind of little group. Now, something that can be quite interesting as well here is, we'll get to my shading technique a little bit later on. It's the same one that I use in regular art rather than just pixel art, but it is something when I've got stuff on different layers that can be a little bit of an issue. So at this stage, you can think about, like, are you just going to apply shading straight on to the work that you're doing? So that you can move that whole unit later on, whereas the way that I tend to do it means that I'll have to do a lot more work if I want to move stuff later on. So just something to think about. If that didn't make sense, it will a little bit later on in the stream, I promise.
Made sense to me. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. So again, you can see now that I've filled it, you know, I can move this around wherever I want, and kind of leave it wherever I want, depending on kind of what works, what doesn't work, where I want the colors to go. I kind of like it here because then there's, you know, it looks like there's a kind of a pipe going to it, or we could just kind of leave it here. It really kind of doesn't matter too much. What we don't want, if we're going to have these thick outlines, is to do this, right? To have this double down on the outline, that's no good. So we want to make sure that we're putting it in an area that's not going to kind of clump and be horrible and do bad things for us.
Yeah, but again, that makes sense because the lines together basically makes it a double line, so it doesn't look like there's a gap there at all.
Yep.
So it's just, doesn't quite look right.
Yep, that's it. And this is one of the concessions and potentially challenges of pixel art, is trying to make it work for you. So one really kind of good example here, for instance, are these tools, or this little kind of flag that I've done that you can see here. So what I've kind of done since yesterday is added a kind of a different layer where you can see here, I've actually colored my outlines to be not black, but a darker version of the thing that it's outlining, except for the actual complete outside of my drawing. And what that does is it allows me to have something that will potentially work a little bit better in some scenarios. And how that works is like this, right? So if we take let me undo this. We take this hole here. I think it's probably a bit too thick because I'm putting an outline on it, right? Because I'm having to have a middle in between my two black lines so that I can put a color in between that, right? So I can go in and put a color there, but that means that my hole is actually registering as being quite wide. And maybe I don't really want that. Maybe that's not something that I'm looking for here. Whereas if I didn't have these outlines and I could just work from a specific color, then that lets me literally just have the one tone and have that go there. And now I've said what I needed to say without having had to kind of double down on an outline on either end, which makes it really, really thick and hard to work with. If you look at another example of this, is if you look at these stools, my stools had 4 legs in my sketch originally. But in order to get that on such a small amount of pixel art real estate would be impossible. There's no way. Like, I would never be able to have this kind of chair. If I kind of like show you guys what that looks like. Let me duplicate that actually and bring it down over to here so we can actually see what it does. If I come in and erase, well, I'm going to leave that one there, but I need a thickness, right? So I'm going to have an outline there, and I need another table leg, a stool leg over here, and that needs to go over there, and then like up here. It doesn't.
Yeah, you'd have to make them really, really big. So it doesn't kind of work either way. Like, there's no middle ground.
No. So this is where maybe I would decide either what I did originally, which is to kind of take away and just make it like a stool. I mean, it's not terrible, but
it's not too bad, actually.
It's not great either. Like,
it's not too bad, but I get what you mean.
Really what I want.
I get what you mean.
It's
like, it's
really
highlighting two kind of potential issues. One is deciding on outlines. Deciding on outlines is going to make, making small changes just more difficult, even though it might look really good. So there's a bit of a concession there. And I think the other takeaway for me is to be open to like varying away from your sketch a little bit, to like be a bit flexible, be a bit open-minded. By making those just solid McDonald's stools or whatever they've turned into.
They look like pixel art jellyfish almost a little bit. But yeah, that kind of worked out okay. Potentially maybe a better example of this is here, right? On the edge of this little kind of like outcrop plank of wood. If I want a bit of volume to that, if I want to show some thickness, then I'm going to have to go in and kind of do an extra thing. And then it's like really, really thick, right? That's like super thick. It does add to it because it makes it, not just this kind of flat plank, but it also makes it really just, I think, a little bit too thick. And so instead of doing that, if I can twist the colors a little bit to have a shading go on the outline, then the thickness of that is baked into it, and I don't have to worry about it. And then you can see that looks like it's got thickness, but I haven't had to do any outlines. So generally speaking, I tend to prefer going for the option of colored outlines rather than solid black outlines, simply because there's just a little bit more like language that I can speak with this a little bit more easily, without having to kind of have these concessions of like, oh man, I can't do this. The other alternative is just to increase your pixel density. But then, as we spoke about yesterday, that potentially starts to land you in the world of pixelated art rather than pixel art, where now you just have like, it's too high res, or you've just got too much detail to work from, and it just doesn't work. So I'm going to go ahead and do this guy the way I said, and I might even kind of double down on it just to make it a little bit thicker maybe. I kind of like it just the one. There we go. And in fact, I've kind of done that on the wrong layer actually, because that's part of my detailing.
You're probably going to show it, but how do you get that different tint, that lighter tint of the color that's there? I'd like to see that process, because I feel like that will be important to find a good fast way to do that, rather than color picking and then changing the opacity or something each time you did it.
Well, I do actually just color pick it.
Oh, right, you do. Okay.
So
I often try to think about like, how would I do it? And I'm like, it's probably the worst possible way, but sometimes it's the right way.
It's funny because it's like, I get this with my students a lot too, where it's just like, how would you do this? I'm trying to figure out, like, do you make a new file and save it as a weird format and open it in Illustrator and bring it's like, oh no, you just press this button and it's done. It's like, oh okay. I think Photoshop invites you to like try and think of these like weird and wacky ways to do things that are unnecessarily complicated.
Right.
So literally what I do is, like for this awning, for instance, when I'm in my brush, if you hold down Option on your brush tool, you'll get the eyedropper come up. I just eyedrop that, double click on the color, and then just pick a lighter color, a darker color or a lighter color, depending on what I'm doing. Now, we've spoken about this a few times before as well. Generally speaking, when you're trying to pick a darker tone of a color, just adding black is the wrong way to do it, because anybody who's ever used paints before, especially for like a yellow. So if I eyedrop this and I have this and you kind of like go down here, you get this really like horrible, like baby vomit color. That's not great. So adding black is not the way to go to this. What you want to do is go, if it's like a cold night, maybe you would add a little bit more blue to make it feel cold. If it's a warm, like summer's evening, maybe slide it into the reds so you get a darker tone of that yellow. And that just means it just works a lot better as like that's the dark version of that color rather than the black. So generally speaking, you want to add in a little bit of kind of in shading. You want to add a little bit of blue because that's where the sun isn't hitting. So it's a bit of a cooler light, but it really kind of depends. But yeah, essentially, like if I show you, for instance, on this AC machine, I'm going to do the shading on the colors on that. You can see I've done it up here, so I could probably pick that one, but it's essentially not just me going in and sliding that down towards the black. It's actually going, you can see that as I've done that, it's going more towards the blue. So you don't go straight down, you go down and a little bit over to blue shift to get that kind of tone. And then what I do in order to kind of make these outlines stick without having to kind of go over it, again, pixel art, it's not too much of a big deal, but this always helps, is locks the transparency of my outline. So I don't have to worry about painting in other places. I'm literally just going to go over my outline cleanly. I don't have to like pay too much attention to what I'm doing when I'm doing it. And there we go.
Nice.
And that has a little bit less of a like a harsh feel to it. Just feels a little bit nicer. Now you can go even further into this if you want to, and like go full outline shading and colors, which I tend to not, but you can then go and find the highlights on something and use the outline to create those highlights. I find that a little bit kind of funky. It doesn't work super well for me. What does work, however, is doing that on the side here and trying to get that kind of color on top and get that AC unit to actually look like it's going to be a little bit darker. Now, I can't use the same tone that I used for the outlines over here because otherwise we won't see it. So I need to go just a little bit lighter and going in there. There we go. Now, this is funny because you can see actually when I've zoomed out, it looks like this little aircon unit has a little thing and it kind of hooks back a little bit. You can see there's just one pixel just there. This little guy right here is kind of giving a weird optical illusion of the aircon unit kind of wrapping down on itself.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to go in and cheat a little bit and finish it off, and then it looks like straight.
Right. So you didn't want to continue the line down that side?
Probably not, because if I do that, what I'm going to get is potentially I'm going to get a clump down here in that area where there's too many pixels touching, and it starts to be a little bit of a clump. So I'm cheating a little bit by not putting it in there. Again, it's one of those like concessions of pixel art and little tricks that you can use where you can say things without having to say too much of it. But yeah,
cool.
It's sometimes it will just not really cooperate with you and not let you do what you want to do. Them's the breaks. That's the nature of pixel art, and the limitations that it imposes on you are what makes it look like pixel art. So that it is important for you to think about, like, how do I actually make this work for me?
Yeah. Cool.
So let's put some shading on here as well. Yep, good. Like so. And potentially a lighter tone up here too. So with reds, you want to go in and kind of, instead of just going pink, we want to go into the yellows a little bit and just kind of bring that up. Just so we're still going to get this like salmon color, but we've just got a little bit of yellow in it as well. It just feels a little bit more natural than just like actually pink. No light is ever completely white or completely black. It's always got a slight color in it. And getting that kind of color shift in there is going to make all the difference in your artwork. And let's get this guy and fill him in too. So I want a bit of a darker tone there. And we can start thinking about details. So again, here, like ideally what I'd want is to be able to kind of draw like a little something like this, like put your, tap your card on this or whatever, but I can't do that because I've only got 3 pixels to work with. So anything that I'm going to do here is going to have to be either 1 pixel or it's going to touch the edges of the outline, which looks horrible. So unfortunately, that's just going to have to be a 1 pixel wide thing. But again, as you zoom out, it kind of doesn't matter. Your eye does a lot of the work for you and interpreting what you're seeing and how it all works. Yeah. What else could we put in there? We can start to think about like details, like, all the little bits and pieces that I had here, like a little bin and added posters on here and all that kind of jazz. But what I want to show you as well is I had some trees happening behind here. So I'm going to draw those in a sec, but I'm actually going to draw some bushes in here to show you guys how this is potentially going to work. So I'm going to make a new group and I'm going to call this one bush. And I'm going to work from, I'm not going to bother too much with an outline. I'm just going to work from colors straight up. And I'm going to do a little bit of like a clump. It's just like a cube almost, right? So down, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I need to move that up a little bit further to here. Yes. It helps if I actually put my layer in the group that I made. That's always an advantage. And so we can take this now. I might need, now let's see. I'm going to flip this and work to that. That's about right. Whoopsies. Not sure what has happened here. Here we go. Now I'm going to smash these two together, duplicate those, and rotate it like this. And I've got, going a little bit crazy when I'm doing this. I've got basically kind of what could be a cube, right? I just need to come in and get this happening. So now you should be able to see like that is actually a cube.
Right.
And again, because I've got like 2 pixels only to work with, I don't have a middle pixel. So I'm going to have to make a sacrifice and just go, all right, that side's going to get it, or the other side's going to get the outline. Oops. Because it's just like I'm stuck here. I can't do both at the same time.
Yeah.
But now we can kind of fill this in and highlight this with some darker tones. So I'm going to get green here, but I'm not going to slide it down to black. I'm just going to get a slightly bluish tone to this. And that one's going to go over here. Like so. And then this one's going to kind of sit in the middle. So that's probably as light as I want the light area to be. And then we wanted like a mid-tone in there to kind of differentiate the 3 sides that we're looking at with this kind of bush. So we've got like a very, very basic kind of box bush, but we want a little bit more detail in here. So we can start to kind of think about, adding in a few kind of stray bits of branch. Maybe symmetry is not a good idea when you're doing this. So let's try and be a little bit more random with how this works. And again, from up close, it looks like hell, but from a distance, you're going to start to, your brain's going to do some work for you and go like, oh yeah, those are like leaves and things coming out of the bush. I can see that. We can also start to think about, like getting some of these in here and getting some of those in here to get some like extra little dimension of this. Yeah, it depends on the level of detail that we're doing. We're going for real like solid isometric. If you look at kind of like pixel art, tree or bush or whatever, you'll see this kind of thing where you can actually start to see some leaf shapes and some shading on the leaves and highlights and so on, which would be really cool here, but we're limited in our kind of pixel real estate. So we need to kind of make some choice cuts when we're doing this. We can go even a little bit more and go in a 4th color, and then even more with like a 3rd color, a 4th one, sorry, down here. Cool. I'm pretty happy with that.
Nice.
Let's grab this. I probably didn't really need to put it in a new layer, to be honest, but I can grab this and put it here. Now, what's cool about this is I can just take this guy and make another one next to it, and they can be identical. That's the whole point of this, is like the fact that they're identical makes it look like a little video game where this is like, hey, have you got the bush asset? We need to put some more bushes in there. And because of the kind of the budget thing that we spoke about, where computers didn't have a whole heap of computing power, you wouldn't do what you did today, where it's like, hey, we're going to do a forest. Let's have 500 different individual trees and randomize them throughout so that you can't see the repetition too much. In those days, it was just like, hey, we're just going to do like 1, maybe 2. And then the computer doesn't have to think about as much.
Yeah, and then it's just 2 assets, and it's like referencing that asset. So it adds to also like the amount of storage that they had back then. So yeah, it's interesting how that impacts like how you would do the art these days.
Totally. And I think it's completely part of the style that you're looking for when you're trying to do pixel art. And so these little kind of like hedges can just sit wherever we want now and just kind of move around. I could probably flip them around if we wanted to and just stick them over here. They're probably not going to go on the road. It doesn't make a heap of sense, but you get the idea, right? We've created a little asset that we can then move and duplicate and kind of shuffle around. If we don't want them all 3 in the same row, I can put like maybe how's 1 on every corner look? Like, that's not bad. Like, kind of looks like it would be a thing that you would do. Just put a bush on each of the corners of the street. Could work. So Yeah. So then we got we're starting to get a little bit more detail. We're starting to get into the kind of the nature of what we're doing here. I can also then go in and do something totally random. And on the background of my thing, I'm going to put in a whole extra tree using the same kind of tones that I had before. Let me turn my layer off here so I can actually see kind of what I decided to do. And I want, like a Japanese kind of pine tree feeling to this. So I could go a bunch of different ways here. I could stay true to my drawing and just do like what actually looks like a proper tree happening here. Or I could go again stylized and use my little cubes that I did and make just the kind of the clumps of the tree. What I'm looking for here is this kind of like little, your classic Japanese kind of pine tree that has like this kind of vibe to it, where, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm going for. But what I could do if I was going like full stylized is just keep those as boxes.
Yeah.
And you reuse the same cubes that I did before to kind of try and keep this element of like style of like isometric perspective. That would totally be like a creative thing that I could do here. I'm going a little bit more detailed. And so I'm going to try and just keep it a little bit more like natural looking tree.
Yeah.
Just to kind of work a little bit better. By the way, you saw me kind of taking off the white grid here. That is done with Command H, hides and shows the grid.
Right.
So it can be a little bit tricky if you're working at this distance to kind of see the colors because you've got a lot of white lines. It kind of puts a bit of a veil across the drawing. So Command H just gets rid of it and you can just see the colors as the kind of intended for them to look.
And did you have to set up something specific to see that grid? Like originally, it's just Command H, no matter what you're working in. It's just, we don't normally see the grid that detailed because we're not working at this kind of scale.
That's it. Right. The grid always lives there. If you zoom in enough on a drawing, you'll see the pixel grid going. It doesn't matter what kind of file it is or what kind of drawing it is. If you zoom in close enough, you're going to start to see this pixel grid.
Right.
It's just you never see it when you're working normally because you're never, as you said, working at these kind of like very low res pixel art resolutions, so you would never see it. But when you are working in pixel art, knowing how to hide this is going to make a bit of a difference. And it's the same thing that you would use if you're doing a selection on anything and you want to see what you're doing, just hide the selection. All right, so that selection is still active, but I've just hidden it. So just Command H, which makes sense, Command hide, and you will hide your pixel grid.
Nice.
So I'm starting to be quite happy with the level of detail and kind of how it's all looking at this stage. Getting a little bit more clarity in there. Maybe let's add something up here and come in with an eraser down here. Just so we can start to see some brown in here too, because we want, it's going to look like a tree, but having the bark of the tree in there is also going to be pretty important for me. It looks a little bit flat, maybe, but it's not terrible.
I really like how the little cube hedges turned out. I think they look really good.
Yeah, and again, like you could just make a brush out of these if you wanted to. If you had like a ton of them to use, you could just make these out of a brush, and then you could just literally like just stamp them out throughout an entire drawing if that's what you were kind of trying to do. That would totally work as well. So yeah,
it'd be a good thing to do if you were doing like clouds or something, right? Like
100%.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that absolutely like pixel art is really, really good for. And that's why I enjoy working with it, because it's like all these things that are now possible that you couldn't do before, or you could, but like a little bit more painstakingly, and now possible because of the way that pixel art works and because of what you can do with it. It offers a whole like new way of playing the Photoshop game a little bit.
Yeah.
And do my little chimney here.
Chimney.
Yeah, love that. That's a bit flat. There we go. That's a bit better.
It's like a rain cover on top of like a pipe chimney sort of thing, isn't it? Something like that.
Yeah, that's it. And just give it a gap there. And I'm going to come into my outlines. Just going to whack some of these layers down. Come in with my outlines, pick that color back up. There we go. Oh.
Go watch out for the clumping.
All right.
Nice.
Bad things have happened here. What have I done here? There we go. That's what I'm after. And I probably need to put some highlights on it so we can actually see what's happening. There we go.
You do like a shadow and a highlight on it.
Yeah, well, it shows volume. It all of a sudden it makes the thing no longer flat. And speaking of clouds, let us go in and make some little puffs of smoke coming out of this.
Will they be cubes or not? We'll find out.
So they can be cubes if we want them to. It's not a cube. We can do this. That might start to be a little bit too graphic, right? So this is now kind of like clashing with the rest of the style that I've made, which is a little bit more realistic. So potentially that's not where we're going to kind of live here.
Yeah.
But, definitely something to kind of consider when you're kind of doing this is how you can kind of make the thing that you're trying to look at work a little bit better. So if we wanted to do a dot, for instance, that could be a dot. Whoa, what are you doing? Or we could just literally just draw out a little kind of puff of smoke and just make it random. Looks like an airplane. And now it looks like a space invader.
Hey, it does look like Space Invader.
Little like Space Invader reference in my drawing here.
Yeah.
Why not? That's not what a Space Invader looks like, but it doesn't matter.
It's pretty close.
Okay, so let's get into some shading now. So again, as I said, there's the shading that I did on the AC and on the vending machine, which is just like hardcore on the actual thing that you're doing the shading for, because then I can move it around, right? So I can actually kind of edit it, move it around. You'll see that the big cat head sign also has its own kind of thickness and a layer of shading around it. The AC unit does that, the vending machine does that, and the bushes do that, so we can move them around. But traditionally, what I would actually do when I'm doing this kind of work is I would actually take all of this, group it into a new group, call it all, and then put an adjustment layer on top of it with a hue sat. Now, really important to do here is if I'm going to drop the darkness down and kind of play around with the color of this, you can see that it's doing my background as well. Yeah. So if I move that, the background gets that as well. But if I tick this little guy here, it's like a little box with an arrow going down, it just says adjustment affects all layers below. So it's only the layers immediately below that. And because it works with layer groups, that's why I group all my layers in the same thing, so that it will do only the layers and not the background. Only the work that I want it to do will be affected and not the background. So I can kind of mess around a little bit with that, kind of play with some tones. So it's not just like flat out making it darker.
Oh, and
it comes with a little matte.
Sorry, I did promise to let you know when we have 5 minutes to go, and we have 5 minutes to go.
Okay. All right. So at this stage, all I would do now is I can fill this with a different color, and I can start to come in and paint over these areas that I'm going to have as kind of a different tone. And it's going to do everything. It's going to do my awning. It's going to do my building. It's going to do my outlines. It's going to do the ground on the other side of the building. It's obviously going to do this vending machine as well, because it's in the same layer. So everything that is on this side will start to get this treatment of light and dark, which is exactly what I want it to do.
Yeah.
All right. So again, I'm going super quick here because I've just got one last thing to show you before we're done. But that's kind of my standard way of doing shading, even when I'm doing like regular art, but it obviously still applies to pixel art as well. So we're here, we're kind of, let's say that we're finished and we're happy with this. If I make this Command 1 will show you your artwork at scale. And obviously because it's pixel art, it is ridiculously small.
Yeah.
So I want to be able to print this potentially. I want to make it like a A2 or A3 out of it. I obviously can't do that right now. And so what I need to do is I need to make this a little bit bigger. So let's go into my millimeters and let's go and make this 210 by, and I need to make sure that I've got that tick. 210 by 252, close enough to A2, sorry. But when I do that, watch what's going to happen. I'm going to get this horrible like blurry effect. And that's that's Photoshop thinking that it's doing me a favor when in fact, like it's not, because I want the harshness and the aliasing. So all you need to do in order to counter that is go back in here. We're going to go 210. Whoops, not that much. 210. And we're probably going to go 300 DPI as well. And where it says resample, instead of automatic, we want the same thing that we did on our transform tool, which is nearest neighbor, and then hit return. And you can see in the preview immediately that's going to work a lot better, right? So if I had it on automatic, you see my preview's a bit blurry and kind of funny things have happened.
Yeah.
Because if I go to hard edges, it's crisp and it's clean and it's exactly the pixels that I decided to have. So now this artwork is a lot bigger resolution and I can print this however I want.
Awesome.
Now, the beauty of this as well is if you've done all of this and you've forgotten like, oh man, the client has now decided they want it like double the size. If you were doing regular artwork, you kind of stuffed at now because you kind of have to redo the artwork at size. Whereas with pixel art, because it is already all pixelated and there's no round edges, it's all completely sharp, right? There's no curves. So I can make this infinitely bigger or smaller and not lose any resolution whatsoever.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So I can literally make this like 594. So I'm going to make this like an A2 and it preserves that resolution. It's effectively like vector art that I've created.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool. So that's it. That's basically like now you've done your pixel art. It's ready to be printed. Obviously, if I draw with my brush now, I'm going to get something crazy different. And all my pixels are now much, 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 much bigger. If I zoom in all the way down, you will see my pixel grid.
Yeah.
So what was 1 pixel is now like 25.
Yeah.
But it's print ready. So we're good to go.
That's awesome. I love that, and right on time as well. So we are out of time. This has been great. If you guys enjoyed this, you missed part 1, you can go check that out. You can watch the replay. Obviously, you can watch this replay as well on Behance or over on YouTube. Search for Adobe Live APAC or follow the links here. But Jeremy, thank you so much for hanging out with us. I always love hanging out with you on Adobe Live.
Super fun, as always.
Yeah. And we'll be back next week with more Adobe Live from Asia Pacific. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you then. See you, Jeremy.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ben.
Bye.